Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined for the very first time by Josh Barton for a very special review. This is, of course, the James Cameron Retrospective, and today we're reviewing True Lies, the 1994 action spy film, of course, directed by James Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. But before we get into all that sort of stuff, Josh, welcome to the channel, and how are we doing tonight?
I'm good, mate. I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's delightful to finally get you on. Obviously, we've seen each other at events. Obviously, we're in a few group chats as well on Twitter, mainly the football one we used to get to speak a lot. So it's nice to be like, let's talk some Arnold Schwarzenegger, let's talk some James Cameron. And kind of in line of that, I want to put you on the spot because it's the first time we've got you on the channel. And I'm glad we have. I know we'd spoken in the past about, I think, All or Nothing, was it?
hmm
I want to put you on the spot. I'm not going to ask you anything football related, but can you remember the first James Cameron film you saw, or maybe memory with his films that you might have known were his at the time?
You know what? Funny enough, it is actually going to be True Lies. Um, yeah, surprisingly.
Excellent. No, that's great because we've had that a few times, and it's nice to get different answers. Especially, I think it's the first time somebody said True Lies. So we're going to get into that story shortly. But for anybody watching at home, if you're watching on the premiere, of course, we're pre-recording this in a week in advance. We'll do the weekly Avatar box office update, which is always fun to do a little bit later on. But we want to know your thoughts on True Lies, so please do comment below. If you enjoy this film, if you're not on the premiere, you're watching later on, leave any comments. I'll reply to them myself because this is a film that I think is very popular, but also one that not a lot of people know about. So I'm really excited to see what people think of this. And if you enjoyed this video, you enjoyed this review, do consider hitting the subscribe button. We've only got one more James Cameron episode coming up afterwards, but we do have a lot on the past which you can find on the playlist. And if you want to find out about what other videos we've got going live, anything else that's been happening, go find us on our social medias, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinema savvy, and we've got a link to Redbubble in the description where you can pick up merch. But aside from that, what we shall do with this, before we talk about our memories with it, we're going to do the weekly IMDb plot synopsis, where we still do it because we like to judge how over the top IMDb can be at times. Unfortunately, we've been sent a paragraph this week. So, if you're unfamiliar with the True Lies, I'd recommend turning off this review. Watch the film on Disney Plus because we'll get to that later on. It's actually accessible, and I think it's only been on Disney Plus for like a month, maybe if that. It was very quietly uploaded, but
Yeah, it
I
hasn't been
think
long, has it?
yeah, and it just it's bonkers with the James Cameron stuff, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But the fact we have a weekly segment called like "How Can We Buy It?" that says really a lot about how much of an issue it is getting his films, and whole generations have missed out on films due to stuff like this, which is my theory, and I'll get into that. But for anyone curious about the synopsis, a fearless, globe-trotting, terrorist-battling secret agent has had his life turned upside down when he discovers his wife might be having an affair with a used car salesman, whilst terrorists smuggle nuclear warheads into the United States. Um, I love all of the words they use instead of just putting Arnold Schwarzenegger. Um, a globe-trotting, a terrorist battling, a secret agent. He's fearless. What a way to big up a character we'll speak about a little bit later. But Josh, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot already. You mentioned this is the first James Cameron film we saw. What we like to do in these is talk about everyone's memories. Maybe there's a film they've got a certain affection for. So you reached out to me about coming on to this episode, which was amazing because no one had officially spoke about True Lies yet. And I was like, I know people like
I
this
mean,
film. And you're
what's
like,
up with
can I
that?
come on? Well, this is it. And I was really excited because when someone has to come on, it means a lot more in the sense that, okay, maybe they've got something to say. It means a lot more to them. So I'm kind of curious myself, like, what is your history with True Lies? Because I think it's one that everyone that's seen it's going to have had a different experience in a positive way.
I've got a really, really good story of how I first saw True Lies. To be fair, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent with basically my mum was going out one night, and I think I was about 10, maybe 9, 10. And basically we had a load of VHSs in a load of boxes, and my mum said to my dad, "Why don't you pick out a film to watch with the boys?" So me and my two older brothers, and he landed on True Lies, and obviously he showed us the box. Was like, "What do you boys think about watching this?" And we were like, the box looks a bit dull, but obviously Arnie on the front with a gun. There's a grenade on the back, a few explosions. We were like, oh, I don't really know about this. And just to say, my dad has a bad track record with picking films when it comes to movie night with the kids, because he was tasked with going to Blockbuster one night to pick up a film for the family to watch, and he came back with a 18 certificate. My mum was like, "Are you sure we should be watching this with the kids?" And he went, "Yeah, the guy in a video store said it was really good." We put it in, and it was Starship Troopers, and I was about 8, and obviously the opening scene as that is alien bugs ripping men in half, and yeah, I was traumatized, and he was like, "Whoops, this was a bit of an accident." But yeah, we watched True Lies that night while my mum was out, and yeah, we became obsessed with it there and then, me and my brothers especially. But it's a film my family love, really, and I always find it's a very underrated one from
No,
both Arnie and James Cameron. Yeah,
that's amazing. I'm loving the Starship Troopers thing. 'Cause the guest last week, Eamon, that's the second time it's been mentioned in 2 weeks, which is great because James Cameron's not directed either. But there's something about Starship Troopers that I think everyone that's seen it will just never forget it. You
yeah,
mentioned traumatic, but True Lies as well. The story is amazing, and I think you're right that I saw this. This is the second ever time I've seen this film. For anyone curious, and I saw this. Couldn't give you a date, so I know we spoke before we went live about sort of my background, and I've said this before. I think I said it a few times in the Spielberg stuff or in other reviews. Probably, I think on Terminator as well, or one of them. Um, one of our neighbors, who's like a good friend of mine, is a lot older. So when I was like getting into film and like school, like when I was like 12, 13, every Thursday I'd be invited round, and it was like his like lads movie night. So I'd say, I was in my early teens, they're in their like late 30s, early 40s. They'd all be drinking beer and everything. And every Thursday, without question, I would go around and they'd put a film on, and it was always and something action, a classic film at 80s and 90s. And obviously, because I was really getting into film, they could see that. So they were politely in turn, they had as much joy in showing me a classic film that they grew up with that they probably saw at that age with me, who was that age and wanting to discover more. So True Lies, I will be honest, I didn't know its title at the time. I just remember them saying, "Have you ever watched True Lies?" I was like, "I don't know what True Lies is." And they were like, "Okay, the rest is history." They'd put the film on. And they do this a lot. But obviously most of them, I'd have heard of the film in advance of
mm.
the film being put on there. But, like watching Heat for the first time was just one of the best experiences of my life over there. And his wife was always away because she knew Thursday night was lads night, and like lots of stories, you have your first beers with them when you're like 12, 13 as well, and all that sort of stuff. And True Lies was an experience, and I didn't know it was James Cameron. I probably, if I'm being honest, didn't know James Cameron. The director of Titanic or director of Avatar wasn't really a thing back then. And I wouldn't
Yeah,
know that watching this film of them because it was a DVD because there's no Blu-ray, which we'll get to later on. But watching True Lies, and it's as you said, it's an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, and I think, is it unfair to say like any teenage lad sees an Arnie film, they're going to be fine with it? Like, here's a film you've never seen before. What's the front cover? I know you say don't judge a book by its cover, but if your DVD poster is Arnold Schwarzenegger with a weapon, you know that you're going to be in for a good time.
you're selling, aren't you? It's selling, yeah.
Yeah, it's Arnie, and it's like another Arnie film, and
But then that's
I
what is so great about it, because it's such a good time. I mean, like when we were watching it, I remember my dad was like, obviously he'd seen it so many times before, and just the opening bit in I think it's Austria, or is it Switzerland? I think it's Austria. And when he's running away from the dogs, and my dad's going, "Oh, watch this, kids! Watch this, kids! What he's about to do!" And then we're like, "What's he going to do with these dogs?" Slams their heads together, and my dad's just cracking up, going, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" We're like, "Yeah, this is awesome! Like, what's going on here?" But it's amazing, yeah. Like loving it
and this
every
was
second of it.
Yeah, and it's the word adventure. I think is a term used too much in film, and I think adventure as a genre is a very loose term for we don't want to call it action. That's how I've always felt about it. And with this one, as you said, the last few months doing the series, but more so like James Cameron. When people speak about don't doubt James Cameron, I go to something like True Lies before his other films because True Lies is so different to his other work, and I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
generic by any means at all. But there's something about True Lies that just shouldn't work, but it's unbelievably excellent. It's a 2 hour 20 film that's primarily action, yet it absolutely flies by. No scene overstays its welcome. And I think to me, this is where that James Cameron dialogue comes from, that he knows exactly what the audience want to see. And he's not saying it not to diss on Marvel or anything. He's not saying it from the sake of cameo this, cameo that. He knows as a filmmaker what's going to excite people watching a film, what's going to make for a good experience watching a film. Whether you like the avatars or not, you can't disagree with that, because they've just grossed 9 billion between the first two.
I think when you say that, especially with True Lies, I think in particular, it's just, when you say like adventure, I feel like it's got so many other things as well. It's got the comedy, exactly. It's got the romance a bit later on. Obviously, they're a married couple, but it's not until later on it really becomes like a full blown romance in places. But it's just the action's so good. It's hilarious, and just all of it comes together so well. And that's why I just think it's severely underrated.
No, but it is, and I think it is one of those that if you asked everyone, not like a film bubble or anything, but if you ask most people to name a James Cameron film, I think a lot more people know his films more so than him. I wouldn't say he's a brand in the respect Nolan is to the generic person. They know his films. True Lies is one that I think a lot of people have just never seen or heard of, like The Abyss. Very different circumstances. But also, when people talk about Arnie, and this will be something big for a little bit later, but they talk about Predator, they talk about Commando, they talk about Terminator, rightfully so, Running Man, Total Recall, these amazing films. Not many people ever bring up True Lies, and I'm there that this is right at the top of that pile. It is there with the others, but it's something. It's so strange it's not spoken about much. And kind of if we get into some of the behind the scenes for this, because this is also one where there's not as much out there compared to The Abyss. Half of the conversation was talking about tragedies on set, people almost drowning. The Terminator, everyone up against it. Piranha, one of the worst behind the scenes there had been. There wasn't much for True Lies, and I was able to find a couple of things about how the concept came together, because what I've enjoyed of these James Cameron films is finding out why did he want to do this. A lot of the time it's his personal, we know his obsession with the ocean and water. I know one of the first shots of this is Arnie swimming underwater as well. But it doesn't feel story-wise like a typical James Cameron experience. And the reality is that Arnold Schwarzenegger's brother-in-law at the time recommended him a French film to watch. Now, this film that he ended up watching with him, it was essentially a spy film. Now, I'm going to try and find the name of it. So I will try and come to that in a couple of minutes, because I don't know French cinema at all. Here we go, called La Totale. Apologies on the pronunciation. This came out in 1991. And Arnie loved this film. He then approached James Cameron, and he essentially said that, he wanted to play a secret agent in a film, and he was curious about James Cameron. Now, I'm going to assume, there's no data here, but I'm assuming this is during Terminator 2's filming, marketing, post, whatever, because we know these two have obviously got a history with each other. And James Cameron said that he was very surprised by this, because he'd never seen Schwarzenegger suggest a project on the interest of wanting to play a character in it, which is a very James Cameron response. It's the most backhanded compliment there probably is. You actually want to play a character?
But that's where it's interesting again, because it's this. I always think of True Lies as not the best Arnie's been, but I think James Cameron gets something out of him in that film that we rarely seen before. Like you said, he wanted to play a character, and it's he does. Obviously, we know he can do the action, but you give him the comedy to do as well, and he just does it so perfectly throughout. And it's this. It might go as far as to say this is the best direction he's had to get a performance out of him. Obviously, he's played the Terminator, and that's iconic. But sometimes I watch True Lies, and I'm like, is this the best Arnie performance? Because it is that good.
And this is what I was thinking today. When I was watching it, and I was like, people will say what they want about his acting ability, and I did laugh out loud, not intentionally, when at the start he's meant to be speaking Arabic, and then there was a second bracket that's like fluent Arabic.
Yeah, yeah.
As again, that's probably like a '90s thing more than anything. But yeah, Arnie in this, there's something about this where you've got the right blend of action, and he's not so far into character of, I know Twins has come out at this point that we know he started his comedies. Obviously, we're not like Batman and Robin and stuff yet, but James Cameron gets that perfect middle ground of action and story, and I think in terms of what you said, he's directing the best because I think he's worked around how Arnie is with younger actors, how he is at action set pieces, and something's gone into this performance where he has stuff to do it, and I think he does it well. And I'd say that the casting is a key point in that. We'll get to Jamie Lee Curtis as well, that massively helps. But
Hmm.
one of the things we mentioned comedy and this being funny is that when Arnie told James Cameron about it, James Cameron's sort of pitch for this was, what if Bond had to answer to his wife? That was the story in James Cameron's head, which I think equally is worth telling because I'm a massive Bond fan, and we had one of our oh god, I've forgotten his name. We're going to bring up his Twitter. We're asking people for their thoughts this morning, and we had someone send a really interesting point in for this. Space Odds, who's been popping up throughout this, and he put, as much as I love Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, the spy genre is my favourite genre, and True Lies is a great entry. This is the film that pushed spy action back into cinemas, especially after 007 had been off the screen for so long. And I'd never thought about it. It's 94, there's still no GoldenEye, the James Bond rights are up in the air. And I was sort of amazed reading that. And James Cameron himself, he's spoken in the past about being a big Bond fan. I think it was one of these episodes where he either tried to get into a Bond film and didn't get it. And Piranha II, his earliest film, the poster was literally inspired by James Bond films that he'd done growing up. And it's really interesting that this is the approach Cameron had. I kind of have to ask you that, is that something like you've ever expected? And it's weird to even call it a spy film for me because it doesn't feel like it blatantly is a spy film, but that family dynamic, I think, makes it stand out so differently in a great way.
Yeah. Well, that's what, like, obviously, it is essentially Cameron making a Bond film, isn't it? So it's with the goofy elements as well. So it's got a big bombastic opening scene. Obviously, he dances with the pretty lady, and then he runs away from a load of bad guys, gets out, and then it is a spy film until he hits some marital problems, and it's like, wow, what's going on here? This is a bit of a bit of whiplash going on here. I'm like, wow, well, what's going on here, Cameron? What are you doing? And it's like, you're making the spy film, but you're going at a different angle, which is like, I've never seen this before, but let's go. And yeah, it just works really well because of, like you said, we'll get onto later. Obviously, Jamie Lee Curtis as his wife, especially later on in the film, they're just perfect together in it.
Yeah, and especially the one thing I did, I got a gift for the pot on sale shorts, and I was like, okay, I need a good True Lies, but I don't want the rocket one because obviously everyone knows that. And it was the stare. And obviously, because I've seen the film once, I can't sit here and pretend that I know everything True Lies. And when I was watching without the Leo pointing meme, the stare is him trying to figure out if his wife's cheating on him. And I've just got these images in my head of, like, take Sean Connery's like Bond in the 60s. He goes home one day and he's been on these ridiculous missions, but he's trapped in his relationship and he doesn't know what to do. Obviously, be a bit different with Sean Connery, but it's such an amazing concept. It's something that's so good it could never be done again because anyone that tries a spy film about sort of a married issue, who is James Bond for all intents and purposes, you're just going to say True Lies. True Lies did this 30 years ago, and it's sort of genius and kind of with the comedy side of it. I'm glad you brought that. One of the big things that I was reading as well is that, as many scriptwriters do, they bring on a team, whether it's to do some one-liners, bring a bit of comedy. This is the sort of thing to be chastised today, which is really unfair on a lot of blockbusters today where people criticize, it's slightly funny when it's a serious drama action film. But James Cameron hated so many of the jokes that he basically sacked everyone and said he would write all the comedy himself moving forward and it'd be a good test for his comedic know-how. But he did leave in there one-liner, which of course was the "you're fired" at the end, which it's a very James Cameron thing to do. And if these people aren't getting credited as the script writers, then how do we know the comedy is his? But it's interesting with him again that this is the film of his where there's been the least outright issues, or certainly issues with him in the director's chair. How he's been with his cast, incidents on set with him, overbearing, whatnot. There's almost none of that for this film, which I thought was really intriguing. And let's be honest, the concept of getting rid of some writers because you got them to do comedy and you don't feel they're landing, that probably happens a lot more in the industry than anyone would make out. But I'm just sort of curious, like, what your thoughts is, like, because we spoke about the comedy aspects and you mentioned it's got some of those goofy Bond traits as well. To me, that's what helps make Bond. And I think that's something that the newer films, and I love Daniel Craig's era, and a lot of older fans as well will say that they miss a lot of that, the stuff they grew up with, the very 80s Bond stuff. And I think this film nails how to do that in the 90s because they didn't get to do it as much in Brosnan's era, let alone Craig's.
Yeah. I think, like, obviously, just like you mentioned the stare bit, and it's like, I've forgotten about it when I last watched it. And I watched it with my wife, who was unsure whether she'd actually seen it before. And we sat down and watched it. We got into it, and she was like, "Oh, I have seen this before. Actually, this is really good," because she's not that keen on Arnie, but she was liking it. Then that scene with the stare came up. It was like he's staring his wife out after he's just like traumatized her, and it's like this is ridiculous because it's like it's horrible, but you can't help but laugh because it's Arnie just like the stare is so intense, and it's definitely something that's great to see because, like you said, obviously the Bond films got a bit more serious, and I think it came out, was it just the year before GoldenEye?
Yeah, 94, year before.
So it came out just the year before, and then obviously the Brosnan films were quite cheesy sometimes, weren't they? I mean, they went to the other end of the scale with Die Another Day, but it's good. It's good to see, and obviously, if anyone's going to do that with script writers, if they're not funny enough, it's probably going to be Cameron. Obviously, it's a bit like I would like to see what the script was like before he actually took over, because it might have been really bad. And if you make a film like that where it's like the jokes are bad, then obviously you lose part of the appeal, don't you? Because what makes True Lies work for me is the fact it isn't just all out action. It has the family drama. It has the comedy with him and Tom Arnold, him and Jamie Lee Curtis, him and Bill Paxton. Yeah,
it's kind of one of them that sort of in turn with it and looking at that sort of comedic aspect, that it just, not that it doesn't happen as much, but, and this sounds really bad, so apologies. So I'm sort of trying to brain it the right way. That's something horrible. Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a spy that can blend in, and it isn't because he's Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's the fact that he is built like a brick. He has a very heavy accent, and it's like that opening scene is like fluent Arabic. Like, is that meant to be a joke? I think it is, personally, and I don't think it's not them being cruel at Arnie, but there's just something about Arnold Schwarzenegger being a super spy that can blend in. And he is the person that just cannot blend in, and within itself the casting is genius for that reason, because again it's not poking fun at the spy genre, but it's doing its own thing with it. And I think this is where it separates it more than anything else. And obviously a couple of other behind the scenes things with Arnie himself. We did have one near fatal accident which we've got to talk about, where with the horse set piece, by the way, is just because, again, I don't remember that much. It's like, you're not really going to jump the horse, are you? And again, it's James Cameron. He knows what the audience expects. He will play along with it, and then he'll sort of stick his fingers up at the audience in turn. And he does it so well throughout this one today. And you can tell he's having probably a lot of fun directing this. But there's a moment where the horse was startled, and Arnie almost died, essentially, that he got off the horse, but he was near a 30-foot drop where his stuntman was able to grab him before he, quote, fell off a ledge. Now, as I kind of said, it's not normally a James Cameron film without something potentially dangerous happening to someone. But Arnie apparently has sort of joked about it in the years that followed, saying, it's why stunt people are so important. But I'm just trying to, without being horrible, picture an Arnold Schwarzenegger like comedic balancing on the edge of the building. Now we know he's fine, we can joke about it, but could you imagine like the screaming or something? It's just I wouldn't be able to take it. Like, fair play to the stunts person. You think it's part of the joke, but it's obviously not. And obviously we know how dangerous horses can actually be on sets as well, with obviously other accidents that have happened. But did you know about that? Like, I'm sort of curious, because my my background on True Lies is so limited. I've had so much fun today, like rewatching it and like just discovering loads of stuff.
Yeah, that's the same with me, really, because like just watching it, you kind of just don't think about like the trouble they could have put themselves in. Like you said, he fell off the horse, the stuntman had to catch him, and you kind of just get wrapped up in how much you're enjoying it. That I didn't know about that until you mentioned it today, and yeah, it's just I can't picture it. Like obviously falling off a horse would be like, oh, then it's just like you just
But
can't picture it, can you?
yeah, and that's the thing of Arnie, that there's just something about him that's so, and I don't think it is actually. There's just, I think because he's such an icon in his own right for how he's gone about his career, for the films he's been in, the comedic roles, the dramatic roles, the action roles, he's become, he is a pop culture sensation. The individual, it's Arnie. You're watching, it's an Arnie film, and that's when one of the last action stars, and even the Expendables, the second one mainly, was like the last hurrah for so many of those legends. And it's just amazing to me. True Lies feels like a hidden gem, and it's not because
Mm.
it was successful. But as I kind of mentioned, I think there's a generation that's missed this film, and I think I know why, which I'll get into it in a little bit more time. But we will do one of the behind the scenes bit. We spoke as before we went live, and this is something a bit more personal. So there was an incident on set with Eliza Dushku, who played Dana, the daughter of them, and this came out in 2018 alongside the Me Too movement, that she was molested by the stunt coordinator, and I believe she was 12 at the time, and he was in his mid 30s, which is horrific. Um, Essentially, she was groomed on set. We're not going to go into the specifics of everything that happened, but unfortunately, not just what happened in the respect of being molested as well. A stunt coordinator whose job it is to protect the performers, to do the stunts, to organise the stunts, for health and safety to be paramount, and something that has had issues in the past with James Cameron films is having stunts that have gone wrong that a professional was brought in for this. When she confronted him and her parents, and it got everybody involved, uncoincidentally that day, a stunt went wrong for her, and she broke some bones in her body. Again, I don't want to divulge on that too much. You can read up about that. To me, reading into this today, I was a shock for sure, and I'm glad that she was able to come out. And in respect, James Cameron, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Arnold, and everyone that's involved in this has also came out and spoke about it. There's no defending, etc., that sort of thing that can happen where some people get attached. This is something quite serious, and we kind of wanted to bring it up because it is something that happened on the set, and we know this has happened on other sets, and it's right that people speak up, no matter how long ago people will claim it is. To have two horrific incidents within there, both completely different, to a 12-year-old to
Mm.
potentially injure someone, it's despicable. But we just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if you've got anything to add on it. I know it's a pretty delicate topic, and especially if your first video doing it on this channel, we know these sort of things can be tricky, but we're not going to sit on it too long. But just on a quick, what are your thoughts? With the health and safety of film sets and that sort of stuff, you can't afford to make a mistake, let alone someone intentionally sabotaging the safety after as well.
I mean, it's when you think about it, obviously it came out in '94, and it's like so it must have been '93. It was shot, maybe even earlier, and it's obviously 2018. She came out. It's like we've heard stories going back further, and obviously taking taking this long for it to come out, or for her to be able to speak out about it because of the Me Too movement, obviously shouldn't be the case. We know it shouldn't be the case, but the fact they had someone on a set who, like you said, intentionally didn't look after her and allowed her to injure herself after he'd done wrong and caused her trauma that she's obviously lived through her whole life is despicable. Obviously, you don't want to see it ever again, and it's one of these things that obviously should just be taken out of films. People that can cause danger to other people, especially when it's a 12-year-old child. It's just not what you want to hear, because it's one of those things like, obviously we heard the story about Arnie nearly getting hurt, and you're like, you can joke about that saying, oh, you can't really picture that, can you? Him falling off a horse and screaming. But when you read that today, it's just like
Mm.
something you didn't know about the film, and it's kind of puts a bit of a black mark on it, doesn't it? Really, just like hearing that is just, you don't obviously want anyone to go through that, let alone a child. So
And that's kind of it. And that's why, for me, again, not to harp on the situation too long, because it's an important conversation, as they always are
mm,
and always will be. And the most, obviously not the most important thing is that she's come out, but other people came forward since then, and that is the concept of Me Too. No matter how
yeah,
political others will try and make it, for disagreeing or agreeing or whatnot, the core is that people have their stories to tell. Um, and I think a big thing here is the reaction of the co-stars, because this is certainly a film in which I believe the talent involved are very, what would I say, like, proud of the film. And it's
yeah,
probably equally troubling for them that these sort of things would happen that they had no idea about, that they would never have known about, that would have changed everything about working on it. So it's one of them where it's despicable to read about. And as I said, more people did come forward about Joel Kramer as well, who is the stunt coordinator. So again, it's not my place, but people can look into that sort of stuff, and I would advise you to, because, as you mentioned, you can have a laugh about the honest stuff and nothing happened, but when it is a 12-year-old being groomed on a film
mm,
set, and then clearly intentionally injured, for then rejecting other stuff, that's where it crosses these lines. And it's something that we do need to talk about. And it is, with this series, we're looking at James Cameron's career as a whole. We're looking at his films, and when we do these, decades after the films come out, we have the hindsight of knowing what happened on these sets, certain instances and whatnot. So it is important of how we approach these, and certainly watching the film, knowing that information as well. It just had this sort, especially for the stunt moments, because you know what moments those stunt would have been as well, and it kind of makes it tougher to think about too. And then moving on from next, it's always really hard to segue away from those important moments. As I said, if you want to read into that, there's a lot of articles that I encourage people to have a look at. You can read about, the injuries, what the cast have said to Defender in the years that have followed. So please do that. Now it's the awkward segue into talking about the direction. Now, we spoke about James Cameron because he's a man of many talents. We mentioned he's writing in this, we mentioned he's directing in this. We mentioned that a lot of the behind the scenes, it wasn't necessarily him triggering this. Aliens famously hated the UK crews, never said to film at Pinewood, never came back. And we sort of spoke about the inception of the idea for this, that it was Arnie coming to him after seeing a film. What do you think to the actual direction of this? Because we're 6 episodes into this series now, let's say 8 including Avatar, and I know you've seen, I think you've seen all of the James Cameron films bar Piranha 2, I think, based off me having a stalk your letterboxd, if that's something weird. Uh,
uh,
um,
Bar in Piranha 2. Is it Piranha or Piranha 2?
Piranha 2, unfortunately.
Piranha
I
2
would.
and the Abyss I haven't seen.
Yes, of course. Sorry, The Abyss. We spoke about that. His direction itself, and this is a really weird tangent to go on. We
Yeah.
know he's won an Oscar, obviously, for Titanic, of course, and he's done incredible films. To me, and this is maybe a cruel observation, I don't think he has a specific direction style in the same way that Spielberg. You don't. I'm not just trying to pick like tropes from their work, but Cameron behind a camera kind of goes into what I mentioned earlier, that he knows what people want and that's what he shoots. He's very hands on, and what he wants is what the audience wants. But ultimately, as he said in his Avatar interviews, there's been times where I want the scene because I want the scene.
Mm.
And that's why his directing approach is different to other directors. And this is the 4th director retrospective series we've done, where I'm sitting here sort of 5-6 episodes and I'm saying I can't tell you specifically why his films are different. And I don't want to sort of make it sound derogatory by saying it's popcorn entertainment, because I hate that sort of saying. But what do you think about his actual filmmaking style? Because to me, he's I mean, his record speaks for itself. He has one of the best track records in the history of cinema. He's directed 9 films. He's the second highest grossing director in history behind Spielberg, only like $1.5 billion behind, I think, as well, in box office revenue. I can't tell you his directing style, and maybe that's my problem. Maybe I've been an idiot for like 6-7 weeks, but is that an awkward one to put you on the spot for? That there's nothing to me that jumps out, bar his obsession with the ocean, which we know plays much more effective Titanic and Avatar 2?
I would say he pushes himself to.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know with Avatar, he's doing a whole advance in technology to bring those films to life. But say with Terminator 2, the truck chase, where they said about the helicopter going under the bridge, was it? And it's like someone told him, "Oh, we could possibly fly that under a bridge," and he said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, we're doing it." And it was like, that's pretty insane to film that back then. Obviously, yeah, just pushing himself. But I think with True Lies, I think it's the most fun it seems that he would have had on a set. I think because you hear stories, you don't know what to believe sometimes, where he could be a bit of a tyrant on set. Like you said, obviously the accidents, people nearly drowning on sets, and other cases. But with True Lies, it just feels like, because of how goofy it is, and it's him setting out to make his own Bond film. I can't imagine him not having fun on it and bringing his style. He's good at blockbusters, we know that, and he can deliver some pretty good spectacle. So I think he does that a lot in True Lies. Like you, it's hard to pinpoint an actual style because, it's difficult to pinpoint it exactly. But I think just going out and having fun on this one was what is clear through the film, if that makes sense.
No, it is. It's a really good point. You mentioned the word pushing himself at the beginning, and it's kind of like those. I mean, I know we're big on football, but you have these elite sportsmen, sportswomen as well. Sorry, and there will. I'm not going to name names. I'd go with like Hamilton for F1 or like Messi football. That is, as if these impossible circumstances, and they will push themselves to an outcome. Perfectionist is a label for it. Insane could be another label, that people will do this. And certainly in direction, I feel that's something. Now you kind of said that True Lies maybe isn't the film for that, but you've kind of then also answered. True Lies is the one where you feel like it's the most fun. He's got, an he's got Arnie, who he's shot films of, who are they're very close to outside of the industry, and in the lead role, they've come up with the idea together. You've got Bill Paxton coming on board, who has been in a lot of his other films, who's clearly someone that he's near and dear, who, let's be honest, he plays him in the Titanic as well. He's playing James Cameron in the Titanic. And there's something about this that sort of works. And this is why this segment's harder, because when obviously I said we've done this for like Spielberg, you could talk everything like personal trauma, story, all that sort of stuff. But with True Lies and with James Cameron, he's sort of mystic and kind of about it. He's pushing the boundaries of technology. And the last couple of episodes, we've spoke about, in Terminator 2, ILM, they were developing motion capture that first started back in the abyss. And look at where we are with Avatar, The Way of Water, where motion capture's gone from the abyss to that. And he has pushed the technology, he's pushed the industry forward, designing that software. To me, he's a George Lucas type. He is coming in and he just wants to make the films he wants to make, and he wants to have the tech he wants to have, and he'll help build it, he'll help develop it. And it's a really fascinating question. I feel like I should have asked other people this in other episodes now, so sorry for putting you on the spot, but you answered that really well in that respect. And kind of in line with this, we spoke about the concept of the story. We mentioned it's very Bond-esque, and then we've got the family stuff. I guess it's worth sort of going into that story dynamic as well, is the married life. I think the film could backfire if this part doesn't work. That if for whatever reason we're talking about these people behind the scenes, we're talking about someone who's struggling with his wife, is she cheating on him? If you've gone into this film with an approach of, I want an action spy thriller, the middle 45 minutes could lose you. They might be questioning themselves, thinking, what's going on, where am I? But then you get to the final act, and James Cameron's worked his magic again, and that 45 minutes of the family life has built up to this insane climax that's also just so satisfying to view. Kind of wonder what your thought is on that as well.
I think it's treading a very fine line when it comes to the whole marital stuff, because it's like, this guy has access to anything with the, is it CIA or is it CIA? I think it's CIA.
I think CIA. I could be wrong.
Yeah, so he has access to anything. He can track his wife. He does all that, and it's like, okay, where are we going to go with this? Because this could get very weird. People could fall out of love with the film. They could be like, I'm not watching this anymore because it's getting too much. And then obviously he does a whole thing where he makes his wife do a mission where she dances for him, and he sits there with a recorder playing another man's voice, and it's like, okay, so this is treading that line even more. But then, like you said, obviously it comes back with the last 45 minutes, hour, which is just, it's just insane. It's Cameron where I don't think I've seen him before, because obviously, like Terminator films, obviously one of them being like a horror film and the other being a big action blockbuster. It's not something I've seen from him before in terms of choosing to do that in the middle of a big action blockbuster. Yeah. And it's definitely a choice that I think works, because I think the writing's good enough to make it work, and we've already mentioned the cast together, they make it work. And you think without the cast they had, I think you'd lose a lot of people, but I think it's done just well enough and just right enough to keep people invested in the story. Because it does go to points where it's like, obviously they then bring in Bill Paxton, and it's like, this is perfect, because he's just a fraud. Obviously then Arnie's character is like, this guy is just impersonating me, like rages him even more, and it just builds and builds and builds, and it all just comes together really well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, let's talk some of the characters. So we've not spoken about Jamie Lee Curtis too much, and we've spoken about Arnie. I've just got to say that the on-screen chemistry of Jamie Lee Curtis and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, I mentioned I've not actually seen her in a lot of things, which that's on me. Certainly, it's one that hasn't. I'm trying to think what I've seen outside of Knives Out and this. There's probably a load that I've forgotten about. Is it Freaky Friday? I think she was in as well. Yeah. I could be wrong, but on paper, look at photos of them. I wouldn't ever imagine they would be married, let alone have like on-screen chemistry. Yet together, for some reason unknown, they are incredible with one another. And I think this is the James Cameron effect, that he can make anything work. And certainly in so many of his films, even, I know you said you've not seen The Abyss, and that was a pretty tough review on how we were with it, but the chemistry of his leads is never in doubt. Even if you're going to go to Avatar, which is motion capture, but you've still got performances from the actors who make a blue couple work in space.
Yeah,
and these two are just amazing. And Jamie Lee Curtis won a Golden Globe for this, which I didn't think could be nominated, let alone have that success. Yeah, she was nominated for a Golden Globe, and I'm gonna kind of say, without harping on the Oscars, I didn't enjoy the EEAAO nomination for herself, and being honest.
Oh yeah,
it's a legacy nomination, which is great for the career, but Stephanie Sue got in, so that's the main thing, is that all of them got in. But I think if Jamie Lee Curtis is cast wrong in this, the film won't function. That I think you're in such safe hands with Arnie. It all comes down to, of course, who's going to be playing Helen, and I just kind of know, like, what is your thoughts on her in this film? Because I've not seen any of the Halloween films, Again, I know she's very much like a scream queen, background of horror, but for me, who's seen almost nothing, I didn't envision her as somebody that would jump into that action, at times comedic route, but she is amazing at doing it, which really caught me off guard.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's really good in it. Obviously, we've seen her do comedy before, like you mentioned, Freaky Friday. It's a bit of a taking the piss out of yourself film, because she's got to act like a teenager, hasn't she? So we know she can do that. And like you said, when obviously it comes into throwing herself into the action with Halloween, albeit she's not running around fighting Michael Myers as much as you might think. She's running away from him, screaming a lot, especially in that first film. But when it comes to the action, I'm going to mention the scene with the Uzi down the stairs. It's perfect, because you think, oh, here we go. Spy's wife, she's going to absolutely massacre everyone with that gun. But no, what does she do? She drops it and literally shits herself, basically, because she's like, oh, falls down the stairs. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in a film. But it works, not only because it is so goofy, but because she's so good at the comedy as well.
Yeah. I'm with you. And I think that's... that, I mean, just the way that she's sort of the slow-mo, and it's the the repetitive shots of the gun. And I think at what point is it going to go up her way? Could it shoot her? Could it shoot Arnie? Because let's be honest, some comedies would probably have a bullet shoot Arnie for like comedic effect that she shot her husband or something. But that moment shouldn't work, but it works because, as you said, the performance behind it, the fact you're expecting as an audience member it to be this big moment of becoming one of the action, and she never is, and I think that's what goes the long way. And with that comedy aspect as well, her reactions to finding out, she can't acknowledge the fact that Harry is a spy, and she thinks he's the one in the wrong the entire time until she sees him killing people left, right, and center. And it's so funny the build up of that scene. And again, I think if it's any other director, if the script doesn't work, that the twist won't function. That she's got to believe he's a spy. The film could fall flat and end there, and then, and in turn, you wouldn't think she'd believe that she could go on to help with this. And kind of Arnie as well. We spoke a lot about his performance. In truth, that's a question I'm going to pose to people at home. Like, performance wise, maybe not film, maybe not iconography, but is this Arnold Schwarzenegger's best performance in a film? I think that's a fair question to ask. I don't know if it is because I've not seen all of them, but I certainly feel that it's like, to me, and this is more of an age thing. I prefer 90s Arnie to 80s Arnie. I know that's quite like, I don't think it's that hot a take, but because I think I grew up with seeing his comedic roles before his action roles, something like True Lies is that perfect blend. And I just feel that it epitomizes his career and where it went and what he'd done up to that point. And there is something about his performance that I just can't take out of my head. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah. I've always thought of it as one of his best. I'd probably have it top three, top three performances of his for sure. And I mean, like you said, obviously having him as a spy, with the broad accent, the fact he's built like he is like, yeah, this is a bit ridiculous because obviously someone like James Bond can fit in a bit more because he's obviously a bit more suave, but just contradicting it with the whole fact they make him a computer salesman as his cover is just like, this guy really. I mean, I work in IT sales, and it's like you don't see many people look like that walking around the sales floor, and it just, yeah, it's just a, yeah. I think his performance is really good in it. I'd put it top three of his, maybe not top, like, because obviously it's sacrilege to say it'd be ahead of
Yeah,
Terminator, because obviously there's
especially
two
Terminator
different.
2 as well.
Yeah, I mean, we only say there's two Terminator films, don't we? Because let's be honest. And he gives obviously very different performances in both of those. But there's just something about this one where it's, no matter what character he's on screen with, he shares such good chemistry. Like him and Tom Arnold in this film together,
Yeah.
just, they crack me up so much. Obviously, we mentioned him and Jamie Lee Curtis, and yeah, it's up there. It's definitely up there.
I mean, I'm glad you brought up Tom Arnold because we've not spoke about him yet. In real life, him and Arnie developed apparently a really good friendship from this film, and that apparently when the studio didn't want Tom Arnold in the film, and James Cameron was adamant the moment he met Arnie that something clicked between them. And they've apparently grown close over these, which is a really nice. I love that when you get. I guess it's like the bromances, isn't it? The one everyone always goes to, of course, is the hobbits from Lord of the Rings. And sometimes the difference of like the fellowship is these guys were together for like 2-3 years. They built more than I think a friendship that cast that was that's a big part of their life. That's almost degree level stuff. But for this film it's the pairing of them that works, and I think there's something that if you look at the dialogue in the film, the only person Arnie can't lie to is Tom Arnold, which is a really interesting. Whether that's intentional in the script, I don't know, but it benefits their on-screen chemistry. And kind of another part of the comedic performance who we have to talk about, who I love, Bill Paxton in this film.
Yes, of course.
To me, one of the most underrated legends of cinema. And obviously, as I say, we tragically lost him far too early. But him in this film, he plays a role of Simon, the sleazy guy just trying to have flings, and you go back to when I guess his first film with Arnie, right, was Terminator 1 when he got, killed by the Terminator. And this time, he's getting taken a ride of him. These two have a really weird chemistry that also works really well. And it's kind
Yeah.
of said that Arnie sussed him out, but it's realizing that he's pretending to be a spy. He's trying to be this extreme. Like he's such a loser. It's so entertaining, and also like he's really like enjoyable in the role that you can tell Bill Paxton is loving this. And I think certain people would probably complain that it detracts away from the story that you're spending so much time with this guy. But it's James Cameron probably wants to, because he knows what the time is spending with him is like goldest. That I'd like the film to be 2 hours 20 and get an extra 10 minutes of Bill Paxton. You can take it away, sure, but it works. And I don't think many actors would have took a role to humiliate themselves in the way he does so often. I don't think many big name actors would take that. And I just think Bill Paxton in this is just superb. And it really adds to the Jamie Lee Curtis side of things, how stupid she's being, that she will go to Paris with him, and the whole interrogation scene. It is just excellent. It is excellent filmmaking, isn't it? In a really simplistic term.
But what I love with the Bill Paxton thing is that, like, at first when he's introduced, it's like, oh, it's a bit of excitement in Helen's life, and then it's like this guy's saying that he's done all what her husband's done. And when Arnie and Tom Old follow her and they listen to him, they're like, who's this guy? They're really worried about him, saying, who's this guy like looking into your wife? And then as soon as they start to realise he's taking credit for your actions, and then they follow him to his car dealership, and it's like he's pretending to be a spy, and he is really a salesman, whereas Arnie is pretending to be a salesman, but he is really a spy. So it's quite an interesting sort of looking at it that way, saying, wow, this guy's like absolutely failing at being a spy, because he's lying completely just to get to his wife and obviously have an affair with her. But I think, yeah, like you said, obviously taking the role to just mock himself, basically. Not many people would do it, but I think Bill Paxton and Cameron have that sort of working relationship that is just, they obviously respect each other. He knows what he's going to bring to it, and you can't imagine many more people in that role, can you? The sleazy salesman, yeah, it's just he's perfect in it.
And just two more to talk about. We'll do Charlton Heston next, which was, again, I didn't remember he was in this. The role he plays, Spencer Chorley, no one will remember the name. You might all think, oh, it's a bit like Nick Fury. And that was the concept of this character. In the mid-90s, guys, Marvel wasn't the brand it is now. There wasn't an MCU for a start. Nick Fury was like if you know comics, you'll know who Nick Fury is. And obviously, at that point, they hadn't obviously switched. Sam Jackson, I think, likeness was used in the comics in the early 2000s. So Nick Fury was still like a white old guy with an eye patch. The Charlton Heston casting is genius in its own respect. That is James Cameron taking a nod. If anyone's not familiar with his background, we've spoken over episodes about how he does a lot of artwork for his films, that he was an artist in his spare time. It's probably why some of his films look amazing, because he actually knows how to draw stuff as well. But also kind of probably shows how insane it is that he probably... I can imagine him going to the art department for Ron Swanson saying, like, I'm better than you. And I can just picture James Cameron doing that to them all. But it's one of them where this small moment from Charlton Heston just works. It doesn't need to be in there, but he wants to do Nick Fury in live action, and he did Nick Fury in live action. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out to that. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that before we talk about Art Malik as well.
I mean, first time I watched it, I'd never seen the Charlton Heston film. I won't lie. So yeah, I had no idea who he was, but obviously watching it now, you're like, oh wow, can't believe Cameron pulled it off, getting someone like him to just play such a minimal role. But yeah, it is memorable, and that's kind of thing, is it? He just doesn't do things by halves. He could easily just have someone just bog standard actor in it, but no, he has to go out and get Charlton Heston, like one of the most iconic actors of all time, just to play a small role, and it works.
Yeah, and as well, Art Malik playing as he's now. I've not seen Art Malik in much except from The Living Daylights. I know we spoke about this before we hit record. I guess we'll talk about the cancel sequel in a bit, but obviously the big thing with this is the quote unquote comedy with the terrorists. Now, obviously, 9/11 fundamentally didn't just changed filmmaking. It changed the world, the perception of the world, wars that followed it, all that sort of stuff. We don't need to talk about the impact of that. Um, I'd never made the connection to these terrorists being comedic, and I think what we spoke about earlier is I think of Four Lions as that's a comedy film about terrorists. Now, actually, Four Lions it is a comedy by heart, but there's some real story in there, and you can hear the cast speak about that as they have done over the years too. Um, but the villains in this, let's be honest, it's a James Cameron film. It is just an action villain. What works to have this silly, over the top action terrorists? Okay, let's not put a bit of an edge on them, but let's make these guys out to be idiots, because the one thing Hollywood does best is humiliating villainous characters, stupidity, all that sort of stuff. Now, this is going to be very, I guess, different generation wise, because people will say, well, you can't joke about that sort of thing, which is 100% true. But I think in the context of 1994, is the Gulf War happened at that point? I can't remember. My history's dropping off there, but it's haunting in the sense of you can look at it saying, okay, a couple of years later, stuff like this, did happen. But in the respect of this film, Tyver O'Gall ends up getting kidnapped by terrorists because the parents have beat them, essentially. Like, it's silly and ridiculous, but it works for what this film is, for what this film's trying to be. It's not trying to be a serious drama with tensions or stakes. In turn, you're not losing the comedy by making these guys to be super serious. One of the funniest moments from the film is when the camera runs out of battery, when he's recording, his message to the world, and people might not find it funny, but it's very well done, that scene. Like, it's drawn out. There's awkward humor. There's continuing without the battery's gone, and they continue to pretend to record him to eventually drop down. I just think
it's how much the guy's sweating as well, isn't it? How much the guy is every time it cuts back to him, he's like even more drenched, and it's like this is good, yeah.
and it just works what this film was trying to be. And if it was a super serious villain, then you'd be expecting the super serious Arnie type action role, which it never is. And I think for me personally, at least, I know that I've pulled this into Art Malik's performance, but I think it works fine for this film. I've not got a singular problem with this. And I think if people have real problems with these guys as the villains in the context of this film, I'd be concerned about them being audience members. If I'm being honest, without sounding insane. But just quickly, your thoughts on the villains, because we'll bring up the cancelled sequel later, which is where it is a bit more obviously. There is some real life stuff that we do need to bring up. But I'm just sort of curious on your thoughts for
that. Well, reading that, Art Malik himself said, he wanted to work on this because it was James Cameron, and how many times you get that opportunity. But to hear that he saw it as kind of like a pantomime kind of thing, with the villains being written that way and portrayed that way, I don't have an issue with it. I watch it, and I think when you actually think about it, that 45 minutes you mentioned before in a film where it is the family drama, it is him trying to work out if his wife's having an affair, what's going on. I don't think he actually appears in it for quite a long gap. So it's like they are the focal point because they are the terrorists of the film, they're the bad guys, but at the same time, the focus is taken away from them so much with the affair going on that I don't think it's problematic, because if you did them where it was like, obviously this is deadly serious and they're in it the whole time, and it's like, okay guys, we get it, they're terrorists, like stop like portraying them this way, but just the fact they stop appearing in it for like half the film is kind of like, okay, they're back now, the marriage problem is not over because they're obviously pissed at each other, but at the same time they're back to stop the bad guys. And I have no issue with it, but obviously when we're just going to talk about the cancelled sequel, you can kind of see why obviously cancelled. And
exactly that. And kind of segueing from the character, we'll talk the score. I don't actually have much to say on the score. Brad Fiedel returns. It's his third James Cameron film. It's got a lovely upbeat opening. But this kind of film, like I've said with many others, with sport, when we did a Spielberg series, we got to talk about John Williams every week, which is a gift. It's the greatest composer. I love you talk Nolan, you talk about Hans Zimmer and Ludwig Göransson. So the James Cameron's has obviously been a bit different, and we'll have James Horner next week. But Brad Friedel scores, not Brad Friedel. I keep getting mixed up. I keep thinking the old Blackburn goalkeeper.
Freedom, yeah.
um,
You know what? Every time I see his name in a credits, I'm like,
you
Brad
think of the
Friedel?
goalie, don't
No,
you?
it's not Brad Friedel. Yeah, it's not him.
It's just,
I wish it was, but it's not.
It's just so frustrating that it's not him. That'd have been an insane second career to have had back in the day. You know, I remember him getting Premier League sticker books, and he was always one of the first players you get a lot of Blackburn goalkeeper. But yeah, the score itself, I'm gonna be honest. I think it's a better score than his Terminator films. However, the Terminator films have one of the greatest themes ever made, which is why that works longer. So I really don't have much to say on the score, but I think that Cameron knows what his audience wants. You know, the pleasures in what you're watching and the dialogue you're hearing more so than the music to carry you through it. And if this had some intense, overbearing score, I don't think it would work for the prospects of the film. But the sort of polite, you know, what I put on the intro for this, it works to get you in the mood for the film. But
Yeah,
past that, I've got nothing to say, if I'm being honest.
I mean, that's the one bit that I remember from the score, really. And then, like you said, it's not memorable, but it works for the film that little bit. And there is one bit actually that I think is at the beginning where he's under the water and he's coming out the ice, and it's a boom, 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 boom. That's memorable,
Yeah.
but apart from that, the bit using the intro, yeah, but yeah, not really much to say on the score because it's quite. I think I looked it up earlier, and there's not actually that
Can't get many
tracks
tracks from it.
listed. Yeah,
No. It was hard to find. When we were doing the intros, it was hard. Titanic, easy. Of course, you can find that
yeah, of
anywhere
course,
you
yeah.
go. But yeah, this one was one of the tougher ones. But it's got the great opening, which I think does help. And kind of move on from the score. We talk about the legacy of this film, its iconography. This was a box office hit. As we say, you cannot doubt James Cameron. This was at the time, following Terminator 2, James Cameron broke another record for the most expensive film ever made with True Lies, which it's hard to think that this was the most expensive film ever made. It makes sense with the amount of sheer action set pieces and following T2 that he would do another action film, but you know, I guess because it's not pushing like modern day highest gross, high expensive budget films where it's invested in CGI, it's invested in, you know, locations and stuff. This is just the old school action shoot 'em up. This is where the money is. The money's on screen. It's in the explosions, and it did phenomenal at the box office. It grossed $378 million and was the third highest grossing film of 1994. Then James, it's the last. Here's a weird stat. You ready for this? This was the last James Cameron film not to gross $2 billion. Which
It's a little rude, isn't it?
yeah, you put it like that, and you think
that goes back to what you were saying about his sort of style of directing, where it's like he made this between T2 and Titanic, and it's kind of like the guy deserves to have a bit of fun, right?
yeah, and it's like I think of Nolan in a really weird tangent. That in between, Nolan didn't just make 3 Batman films. In between, he's like, I want an Inception, I want Prestige, you know, I want to do other things. Okay, they're not fun as such; they're amazing. And it's like Cameron, you know, I love the fact he locked himself away for 13 years to do Avatar and then Avatar 2. And it's at the same time, I'm good. Like, not that we need a True Lies to, but it's like, and I get it. The more I've done this series, the more I respect people that say that, you know, can't James Cameron just come back and do an action film or something? And I get now, it's like Terminator. It's like, I know now why you cry. It's like, I know now why you want him to do non-Avatar films because he's so good at doing non-Avatar films. But then, without shitting on it, we would have had him do Alita, which I hated. So, you know, maybe we're all safe from that. I know it's got its fans. But even Oscars-wise, I mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis won a Golden Globe, which still really surprised me. It was nominated for 1 Oscar for Best Visual Effects. And all I can think of, is the terrible motorbike jump across the skyscrapers. Like, it did Fast and Furious 7 before Fast and Furious 7 did itself. The awful CGI. But I can't let that go. You know, he just did Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 and changed the game of CGI moving forward. But
what did it lose to? Sorry, just
it lost to Forrest Gump. So there was only 3 nominees back then, but you can still tell just by knowing Forrest Gump won. It was the early days of Best Visual Effects, can't you?
Yeah,
compared to where it is now with Avatar: The Way of Water is clearly going to win 2022.
yeah.
What's we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about how we can buy this film, and I'm going to go on a slight tangent. I know I've gone over an hour, and we're almost wrapping up. This film has never been released on Blu-ray. It's never been released on 4K. I mentioned it's just come on Disney Plus in 1080p, and I mentioned that this is a sort of forgotten gem as to why people don't talk about this, haven't seen it. I'm going to kind of speak as my thoughts come to mind. I'm going to speak them out loud, which isn't great all the time, but I feel that if James Cameron made films in between, not just for the sake of in between avatars, because he's made 3 films in the 30 years that have followed this, a lot of the time when a director has a new film coming out, there's a bit of buzz about his old work, right? That a lot of people were watching the James Cameron films before Avatar 2 came out. A load of people watched Nolan before Tenet. They're probably going to watch it again before Oppenheimer. Um, what other big ones? Spielberg, especially famous ones. Loads of people doing Spielberg films. Because James Cameron hasn't been marketed as such with no new film out, because he's been locked away making Avatar, I feel like there's some of his films, I say some of his films, because Terminator and Aliens are larger than life. I guess this maybe goes more to Abyss and True Lies. Because they were beneath the radar of his other work, people have forgot about them. And in turn, because he's never kept these up to date with 4Ks, with Blu-rays, I know they're both meant to come out this year on 4K. We've heard that before. I just feel that this has been lost in the abyss, no pun intended, of people don't know this exists. And because Arnie isn't the A-lister he was 20, 30 years ago, because I don't think Jamie Lee Curtis is known for Halloween and horror stuff, is it fair to say that this is just lost? Like it's something that I think people don't know about, but they should really know about this film.
It's interesting because obviously I can't. It came out what, a month ago on Disney Plus. Was it before Christmas or was
Yeah,
it?
just maybe just before or just after. It was just out the blue. No, didn't even make the homepage to say it was on Disney Plus. It was just on there.
Yeah, but what was good when that happened was that there were obviously all the streamer sites that report it on, say, Twitter, saying True Lies is now available to watch on Disney Plus. And I saw so many people, myself included, obviously who had seen it before, were, oh my god, yes, you need to go and watch this. It's finally in HD. But what was also good was the fact there were so many people. If I checked Letterboxd like a few weeks later, there were so many people who had seen it for the first time. And
Ah.
obviously, it's like, I mean, I would only be able to watch it if it hadn't come on Disney Plus. I've got it in a DVD triple pack with Twins and Kindergarten Cop. So that says it all, kind of, doesn't it? Really? I mean, yeah. So coming on Disney Plus is obviously a big win for the film because it's. I have seen a lot of people watching it for the first time and really liking it, but yeah, if it didn't do that, it could easily get lost. And obviously, we want to see it on 4K because we know Cameron has promised it, and we know people want to see it. So get working on it. Stop working on Avatar and just get True Lies out in 4K.
This is
I'm
it,
sure we'll hear
and
this.
I know one of those because we do more home media stuff now. I've got a lot more of those accounts that this is announced, this is announced. I've been following these for 4 or 5 months, and True Lies was the big one in December. It was like,
Yeah.
boom, True Lies is coming on 4K. It's going to be 2023 confirmed, no release date, but confirmed on 4K. And I think this is what it needs. And the beauty of 4K is, I always, without getting into technical, boring stuff, I always think 4K is the last generation of home media. I don't think we'll ever get 8K on disc. I think will be impossible. And certainly what I've seen of these 4K releases is that they put more effort now into home media, that they know that less people buy it, so they'll put the effort in and make less of them for the collectors to at hand. And True Lies will look amazing. It will look amazing with those set
Mm.
pieces, with the action. If you get the audio upgrades done right. And to be fair to James Cameron, now he's done his Avatar 2. I know he's working on 3, but if it is true the Abyss is done, if it's true that True Lies is done, I think there's a very strategic release happening. Titanic is at cinemas in a couple of days when this video goes up. Avatar 1's going to get a release, I think, on disc. They're building to something this year with James Cameron, and they'd be very, very foolish not to capitalize and get these out for people to see because, again, not tangenting onto home media, but sales have gone up. They were talking about in the news that H&V's had one of its best years in a long time. there's so many streaming service sites. I think slowly people will start going back to disc media because they're just not going to keep up with it. Maybe not a film like True Lies, maybe your big ones, but it is interesting to see that certainly this and The Abyss are the two people don't speak about, and I do think it's because they were left behind, and as we've said, those other ones are larger than life. The franchise films he's done and the franchises he's built with that respect. So that's going to sort of wrap up that part, and if we really want to quickly talk the cancel sequel, I did not know about this. This was all new to me today. Because I'd only ever seen this once, I'd never thought, where's True Lies 2? And to be fair, normally the social media campaigns like Make Solo 2, and there's always a campaign for a sequel to be made. And I'm not talking like the hashtag Snyder weirdos and all that sort of stuff, but normally a decent film, like I'm on the Make Tron 3, not this Jared Leto nonsense, Make Proper Tron 3. And I'd never seen it for True Lies, which is why it had never come into my mind. And the reality behind it is that there was a sequel in production. Everyone was signed up for the sequel. I was getting a bit excited, and it's going to go on a bit of a downer because we've got to talk about 9/11, so I'm going to quickly get my turn right. But
God,
after Titanic, there was a script done, and the plug was pulled in I think 2001 when the script was completed.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2002, they spoke about moving it to the following year, and then it became one of those development hell type films. We'll do it this year, we'll do it next year, until James Cameron basically said that terrorism, and I've got the quote, terrorism is no longer something to take as lightly as we did in the first one. I can't see it happening given the current world climates. And then in the years that followed, Schwarzenegger spoke about it. Some say that because he got into politics, they couldn't do a second one. And he said that the main reason why is that we had a scene set on an aeroplane, again, post 9/11, very understandable. And also, if you're a governor, you really shouldn't be shooting action blockbusters, let's be honest. So it's one of those where, it makes sense as to why they haven't done a sequel. And I'm not going to sit here and say, get on the campaign trail, things have changed. We mentioned Bond, which is a good comparison, that post 9/11, Dying of a Day, Bond had to modernize, like many films did, like many genres, franchises did. And the next Bond iteration, whenever it comes out, 2020, late 2024 or 2025 maybe, I think it will go down to the not the comedic roots. I think it won't be as post 9/11 is like a genre, isn't it? Filmmaking now, like you can look at post 9/11 as its own thing. I think Bond's going to go back to not what it used to be, but have a mix of the old and the new. And I certainly think that, not that there would be a True Lies 2 now, I think it has been too long. But I think the climate for this sort of film would be okay. But I completely agree and understand that you cannot make True Lies 2 in the early 2000s. I know it's tricky. Some people will probably hate that, but that's the way the film industry and the world moved in. And to be fair, the cast at least are very open about that, and kind of what we said, the comedy worked for us in this. Some of those moments, you couldn't have a battery running out of charge in 2002 on a terrorist shooting a video with hostages and stuff. It wouldn't function. It'd be slaughtered. And we know that behind the scenes, James Cameron's very much a believer in like the environment and about people doing better and whatnot. So it's a weird one, but I'm kind of posing your thoughts. Like, did you know that there was originally a talk of a True Lies 2? I'm always curious of like sequels that never make it.
I always knew they were talking about it, and I was disappointed, obviously, when it never came into fruition. But then reading about it more recently, that it was cancelled, why it was cancelled, it's totally understandable. Obviously, you couldn't get away with making that if they released it early 2000s. Yeah. And I was surprised to actually read, I think there's a TV show coming out, unless it's been cancelled. Yeah. And I know it's obviously 2023 now, and like we're saying, you couldn't make it in the early 2000s, but it would be interesting to see how they would do it in a TV series. I mean, I don't see it being any good because it's not got any.
It could work as a mini-series. It'd be dragged out though, wouldn't it? But it could work as a TV.
And it'll be interesting to see whether they're going to take the same approach with the comedy, because obviously I saw the quote the other week when I looked it up, and it was Jamie Lee Curtis saying terrorists aren't funny anymore. and it was that's why that's one of the reasons they said they couldn't make the sequel. And it's like, obviously, she said they were never funny in the first place, but the way we made the initial film,
Yeah.
it works. Because like going back to what Art Malik said, it was like a pantomime. It was like, ooh, they're the bad guys. You boo them. You clap the heroes. You cheer. And yeah, I mean, if we're not going to get a sequel, what I would love to see is it be put back in cinemas. Maybe somewhere like the Prince Charles Cinema, because that'd be awesome.
Yes. Yeah, like get the cast together for like a Q&A or something, you
Yeah.
know, because they're clearly affectionate towards it. And I think it is one of them that, you know, it's not spoke about badly at all, and kind of what we spoke about earlier with, of course, what had happened on set, that they all rallied around the actress as well, that it's important that, you know, they were ultimately a family making this, and if they were all attached to a sequel, there is something there. And yeah, it'd be lovely to see something. And I think we're in this era now where, you know, I'm not being biased, I was born in the 90s, but the 90s is my favorite decade, not necessarily for film, but there's something about the 90s that it feels not like the 80s is the 80s, right? But the 90s, you're getting that modern tech moving in, and I think the stuff
Mm-hmm.
from the 90s is aging better than anything from the 80s and 70s ever has. And it's really
Yeah.
interesting that a lot of 90s stuff to me is going to age better than stuff from the noughties, which is where the you know the CGI and stuff jump in too much. So it's a really interesting decade, and certainly now we're hitting the 30-year anniversaries for films from that, you know, from that era, which is equally as depressing.
I know, yeah.
True Lies is next year. It'd be amazing. Like it's the sort of film that Prince Charles should show, that they'd probably love to show if they haven't already. And
I I think I've seen it listed as part of an Arnie All Nighter before. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I would love to sort of see it there, because
yeah,
they
no, I
could
would.
just do it, and there would be people that like us
We
love the
had
film would just
we
go
had
along.
tickets to an Arnie All Nighter and it got cancelled due to COVID. I remember being gutted. And I think True Lies was one of the 7. They always show 7, don't
Oh
they, on the
yeah,
All Nighters?
okay,
Maybe I'm wrong, but that, yeah, if it is on, I'll check. 'Cause they get so many great films there. If anyone's never been, if you live in England, certainly London, Prince Charles Cinema, the best cinema to watch classic films, especially for the first time. That's where I got to see True Romance, which was incredible on the big screen.
oh wicked.
But as we start to wrap up, before we get to final thoughts, I'd love to know favorite scene from this film. I know we spoke really well for it. We're coming up to an hour and a half, but do you
It's
have
too many.
any an individual? I mean, this is it. There's so many great scenes, and I keep going back to the battery running out of charge, because I think that joke is ahead of itself for the 90s. I think that's something that's probably happened tons of times in the 2010s, but a battery running out of charge during a terrorist speech in the 1990s, that to me is gold dust of comedy. But if I'm going actual action scene, oh god, it's hard to go past the warehouse shoot. It's the whole. There's not a bad scene. There's not a scene I dislike in the film.
Do you know
You
what it
know,
is? It's like I can't say there's one scene. I If I had to pinpoint, I'd say three
go
scenes for
for it.
me that really stand out, and they're all going to be action scenes. But Cameron does action so well, so why
Yeah,
not? And it's the first one's the fight in the toilet,
yeah,
up until the jump across to the hotel on a motorbike, just because it escalates so ridiculously. I mean, the fight itself in the toilet it's the best one up until Mission Impossible Fallout came out, and we all saw Henry Cavill recharge his arms. But yeah, that, and then he gets on a horse. He's chasing a guy on a motorbike for a hotel. He's telling everyone he's sorry while he's going through on the horse, and it's like, this is insane, but like, I love it. And then the second one would be the the chase on the bridge.
yeah,
The bridge is out. That one.
yeah. That's another great one.
the,
Oh,
the
so many.
helicopter rescue from the limo. Yeah, on the highway, and then if that's not enough, he just steals a Harrier jet, and then goes and he absolutely decimates the floor of a high rise tower, killing all the terrorists, and it's just like. It's just like that. Yeah, if that's not enough, we're just going to chuck him in a Harrier jet and just go for it. And obviously, the "you're fired" at the end is just brilliant. So yeah, those three for me really stick out. I know, and they're really long scenes. They're not like, obviously you said the battery running out on the camera, which is just so short but brilliant. But like, I love watching those action scenes where it's like, if you're going to make them long, you've got to escalate them to the point where it's like, this is
commit.
unbelievable now. Yeah, you've just got to go all out, and Cameron does it so well in all three of those scenes. Yeah,
No, definitely, I'm 100% with you, and that's the beauty of his work, his action. And he spoke about Avatar, hasn't he? I want a longer drawn out scene. I'll do a longer drawn out scene, and that's where we're seeing that budget in this film. It's drawing out these scenes, it's shooting them the amount of times they need to shoot them, and God, it just works. He gets it to right. And heading into final thoughts for me, this is an unbelievable. I don't want to call it a masterpiece, but I don't want to not call it a masterpiece. It's this weird territory. I don't really rate films, and I don't enjoy rating films, but this is like a not even a perfect blockbuster. There's something about this film that extraordinarily works on every level that shouldn't work. But it's because James Cameron has made this work, and he makes things work better than almost any other filmmaker. That if you give this project to another director, this film will not be the same. It won't work. And he gets the best out of Arnie. He gets an incredible performance from Jamie Lee Curtis. He's bringing in Bill Paxton. Everyone's got a role to play in this, and they perfectly accompany him in doing so, and it just gives you this wonderful, wonderful final outcome. And the big thing for me with this is 2 hour 20 of runtime, and it felt like an hour and a half long. No point did it ever drag. It was absolutely nailed on for a great time. And as you kind of said, I hope more people do get to see it with it being on Disney Plus. And if they didn't know it was on Disney Plus, then you know now, and you can go and watch it if you haven't seen it for a few years.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. So that is going to do it for our review of True Lies. Thank you, everybody who's been watching at home. Of course, thank you, Josh, for coming on. It's been amazing to get you on tonight. I know we've gone a bit longer. This has been an amazing discussion. I'm glad we could have finally got you on. And for a film as well that's personal to you, that's been amazing to talk about, we'll definitely have you on for some more in the future. And as I said, everyone let us know your thoughts if you're watching it later on. If you want to watch it, if maybe you've seen it at the Prince Charles, let us know, because that's something I'm very curious about now. And if you enjoy this video, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. Now I'm going to go on a bit of an Arnie hype at home. I've got a couple of films in order. I'm going through films I own I've never seen. I've got a few big Arnie ones I need to tick off. So I might just get in the mindset. I've seen the 2 Terminators. I've seen True Lies. Let's get a couple more done. So
what ones have you got to go?
Okay, I've never seen Total Recall, which is a big one.
Oh wow, yeah.
I've also somehow never seen The Running Man, which is one of my dad's favourite action films. And I don't know why I've never seen it. And I believe there's a third big one that's coming out on 4K in a few weeks. No, sorry. The Running Man's coming out on 4K in a couple of days when this video comes out. And I've got an order which is arriving some point this week. Last Action Hero, which I've also never seen.
Oh, yes.
So I need to.
Yes.
I want to tick off a few more of his 90s ones. I've seen pretty much all his 80s ones. I just need to get through them because he's just so much fun when he's in these films, and I love seeing Arnie. So I'm going to try and get a couple more done. But yes, everyone at home, comment your favorite Arnie film because it's always amazing to talk about him. And if you're curious about our reviews, Paul did an amazing impression of Arnie on The Abyss. Which is worth checking that out just for Paul's impressions. Can't pinpoint a time to it, so maybe watch the full thing. But aside from that, if you want to find out what else we're up to, what other videos we've got going up, get us on our social medias, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy, a link to Redbubble in the description below, and please all follow Josh on Twitter at Barton Reviews. What do you normally tweet about? Well, I know you're big on your football, but you've had writing, you do a lot of reviews. What can the people expect, and why should they follow you? Because they should.
If you want to see me tweet about a film, obviously, but if you want to also see me tweet depressing thoughts about QPR, then yeah, go ahead and follow me. That's definitely what you can expect, really.
Everyone, please do. It's always been good getting to know you on there, and obviously seeing events and stuff. So nice to see you soon at the next one. I don't know when the next screen is going to be, in truth. So many films are coming out over the next few months. It's going to be wild.
True Lies at the Prince Charles, that's what it's going to be.
Yes, if it does, we'll go. I promise you. If they do it at the Prince Charles, we'll go. We will watch it. We'll try and get 100%. People going out for that. That'd be amazing. I think that would be amazing at cinema with the crowd as well. And what's next for the James Cameron Retrospective? Well, it's not True Lies, but it's the Titanic. So we're gonna end the series on Sunday with the Titanic. We've of course done the Avatar reviews last year with The Way of Water, with the remaster. So the film is out in IMAX this week. I'll be watching it on Friday night in 3D IMAX, 4K, high frame rate, all the little things James Cameron's been doing in his spare time, the little add-ons to make it work. I'm excited to see it on the big screen. Don't know about the high frame rate, don't know about it being in 3D, but seeing Titanic, the Propeller Man on an IMAX, that's something that's going to look magnificent. So that's going to be live on Sunday. We'll let you know who else is coming on for that. And that's right, we are going live to end this series as well. So that's going to be a fun review. For any hardcore Titanic fans, you can join us. We get to talk about Bill Paxton what's more on there, Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, people drowning, and so many other things, because it's a James Cameron film. And of course, it's an incredible success at the box office and at the Oscars. So do join us there. Aside from that, there's nothing else to tease. I said, Josh, it's been a pleasure having you on. And to everyone at home, take care. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for having me.